Welcome to Pay Attention, interviews about truth in troubling times. And today I'm with Joanna Macy. I'm so thrilled to be with Joanna, and she is an environmental activist, an author, and a scholar of Buddhism, general systems theory, and deep ecology. She's the author of 12 books, and she was married to the late Fran Macy. He was the activist and Russian scholar who founded the Center for Safe Energy. Among her many popular and influential books are a few that I would like to mention here. In 1983, Despair and Personal Power in the Nuclear Age. In 1991, Mutual Causality in Buddhism and General Systems Theory. One of my favorites, actually. 2005, World as Lover, World as Self. And then in 2020, A Wild Love for the World. And I must say that I very much enjoyed these books myself. I recommend them highly. Today, we're talking principally, though, about a recent book that Joanna published with Anita Barrows, came out in 2021. And she and Anita translated and then commented on Rilke's Letters to a Young Poet, Rainer Maria Rilke. And it's a small book that has an enormous punch to it. And so I'll be talking to Joanna today about Rilke's letters in relation to her own life and all of her incredibly wonderful contributions to the world and her engagement with the world. So welcome, Joanna.
Hi there. I am so glad to be in your company again, Polly.
But it's lovely to be with you, to be able to see you, and actually to be able to feel like we can visit a little bit, because that hasn't been possible forever, it seems. So I wanted to start by saying a few things about these letters. You know, they're like many people in my generation. I read Rilke's letters when I was in college, and I was an English major, and I wondered what my life would be like. And now most of my life is behind me, and I read the letters again in your translation, and I had a different experience of them. Actually, they were deeper for me than they had been when I was younger. And I contemplated what it would be like to be Joanna Macy and be translating these letters at a late point in your life. And I wondered how, you would encounter these letters having lived most of your life. And so I want to start our conversation with reading a passage from the letters. And it's a passage that I chose especially because it doesn't necessarily fit with the later part of life. It's a passage about sexual pleasure. And I love the passage, and I wanted to hear, how you think about it now. So here's the passage. Sexual pleasure is a sensory experience, no different from pure seeing or a pure touch, like the taste of a fruit. It is a great, endless experience given to us, a natural part of knowing our world, of the fullness and brilliance of every knowing. And nothing we receive is wrong. What's wrong is to misuse and spoil this experience, and to use it to excite the exhausted aspects of our lives, to dissipate rather than connect. So it's an incredible passage. And I would love it if you could, tell me and tell us about how that passage strikes you now, what you take from it, and maybe how you look at sexual experience in later life.
Well, the impact of Rilke's love for life had come to me when I first encountered him, and through the poetry, and especially through the early poetry. And so this is what I translated, and then I began translating it with Anita Barrows. It was we have an absolute romp rendering his poems in English, because our fashion of working is highly dialogical. It's a collective, reciprocal process, very much like what I intuit is Rilke's own response to life. Everything is in relationship and in mutuality of engagement. And that's what is a great doorway to falling in love with life itself. And it was so when I encountered Rilke, it was, let me see, just one moment, in the 50s. So, wow, almost 70 years ago. I was about 28, so we can do the math. I'm 92 now. And it was through the his poetry, and the poetry that had followed on a liberating experience for the young poet. So he was in his early 20s then, and had a sort of a soul shattering or soul ripening experience that was a love experience, sexual experience with the woman who 15 years older than he, so she was 36, was the remarkable Lou Andreas Salome,
Yes.
been the mistress of Nietzsche, and had a scholar and writer, and he met her and pursued her, and they both acknowledge, though their amorous sexual relationship didn't last beyond a year or two, if that. They both agreed it was the most remarkable experience and lasting experience of their life, and she opened him to. He had been something of a dandy, and she born in Russia in St. Petersburg, and she got him, and they went to Russia together, well, along with her husband, with whom she had a what's the word I want? Platonic is the word, relationship, and helped him, take off his fancy clothes and his gold top cane, and walked barefoot through the grasses at dawn, and become really in love with the natural world. So,
Yes.
with the power of really encountering a living earth, and earth itself, or I would say herself, it's easy right now to tempting to feminize the earth, our planet, and that opened him to an internal world of his own intensities and observations, and his inner world of joy, as a good romp can do. And what they had was more of just a romp, but a relationship that lasted their lives. So I came into a relationship myself with Rilke through the poetry that was written immediately after their return from Russia together, and it was like it had some of that. How to put it? That world-changing, thunderous, delicious impact of falling in love, and falling in love with life. And that's the effect it had on me back then when I encountered the Book of Hours, so that as it was written, and it was written, but almost dictated. There were 5 or 6 poems a day, and they never had to change a word, and so to feel that torrent, so it's more than having an affair, you know.
Yes.
it's
Yeah.
it's like opening yourself up to life itself, to a
Well,
love.
it strikes me also that it's a little like, the in Tibetan Buddhism, where people get a kind of teratons or whatever, they get this sort of download from the mind stream. And I think sometimes sexuality opens that. And Lou Andreas Salome was such a huge influence on so much of the world, and the fact that she was initiating Rilke is something that I think still is startling to people, that an older woman initiates a younger man, and that she does it with not simply, let's say, sexuality, but the sort of sexuality that really opens the man up, that there tends to be a feeling, at least, I don't know if this was true for you, but for me, when I was in college, I fell in love with a philosophy professor who actually became my first husband. But it was that same kind of thing, but there was an acceptance that an older man might do that with a younger woman. But I think at that point, I didn't even know that it was possible for an older woman to do that with a younger man. So I think it's so wonderful that that was a moment in your life when you were.
And it was wholesale. It was what he it reached that sexualized approach to reality itself, where it's the very food you eat. So it was, and what he chose to wear, and what, because your whole sense of who you are and your relationship to life and other people is affected by what the clothes you put on too. Yes. And so it was a deep engagement, and in a very real way, the first poems that he wrote after that in the Book of Hours, totally, it was one. And we published. It's been in many, but our translation, I say ours because fortunately we retain that vital energy in our dialogic way of, we talk the poems into existence, from the German repeating and back and forth listening instead of sitting there chewing on a pencil.
Nice. And so that same energy comes into the translation.
Yeah.
That kind of dyadic energy that really, it is the stuff of the emergence of consciousness. I think the
Yes.
dyad is so central.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So when, at that point, if you don't mind saying, at the point in your life when you met up with the Book of Hours, what was going on for you?
I had just had my second. I was living in Germany. I had been living there for almost 4 years, and with my young family, and I had become fluent in German, and could even pass at that point for a German.
Wow.
And yeah, but it was a remarkable, and I felt like shaken up or brought back into life, as if some part of me was, all of me was fully there. And I walked into a bookstore. At the very moment it happened, is engraved in my mind. And It was a very snowy day, bright snow, sun on the snow. I had been just back from skiing in the Alps, which was my passion. Walking in, there on a little table, this small book, several of them, but that was the earliest publication was still being used of the Book of Hours, and it was books of honoring life. They're love poems to the natural world and love poems to a God who is manifest through the natural world and in deliberate contrast to the Christian and especially Catholic God that his mother had revered, worship sentiment with great sentimentality and made him almost nauseated him. And but there he found, and I'm sure that the erotic connection with Lou extended to his relationship with everything.
Yeah.
Everything. And including Russia, where industrialization was very shallow, and it was the religious orientation was an honoring of Earth herself. Yeah. Yeah.
It's so interesting in the letters where he talks about God and a sort of engagement with kind of building God through life. You know,
Oh, I
it's
love
more,
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was, it's so beautiful. And most people, I think, have the feeling that, well, let's say, like a lot of my friends who are Buddhists, seem to have the feeling that we shouldn't talk much about God, or we shouldn't actually talk about what, even if they, they imagine it's a unitary principle, etc. It's not imagined like the way Rilke is imagining God. That it's the engagement with life, that you build this, and you've heard about it as a child, but you really haven't had it yet.
Mm.
You've just heard about it, because he says you can't lose it to his interlocutor. He says you can't lose this. You haven't got it yet. You're building it.
I know that is so striking to me, isn't it? The idea that you are helping by your very questioning and your very appetites, you are helping God to develop and grow.
Yes, yes, yes. That's a really very extraordinary insight for such a young man to have. At the time of the letters, Rilke was what, about 29 or something?
Uh, no, he was more in the, uh, oh, he was, he was about 23.
Oh my gosh. He was,
Yeah. And,
oh gosh.
no, he was 27, excuse me.
Yeah, I thought
He was
I thought that
27.
the
And
cadet.
and
Yeah.
his the young man he was writing to, who the military cadet who thought he maybe should be a poet instead of and leave the
Right.
military, he was 19. There was there were only 8 years between them. Yeah.
So the insights that Rilke had were really mature, and I assume in relation to Lou Andrea Salome, he came into a world that she was initiating him into, but he then was able to extend it. And yes, this idea of God being created by the engagement of people in their lives,
Yeah.
it's perfect, and it's very Zen, you could say.
It is. It does because and that's why uh, I went back thanks to your fascinating letter, Polly, to read my introduction to that first publication of Rilke translations. I hadn't, and that I found that he resonated with my strong experience that I, especially and in the translation too, with the Buddha Dharma. Yeah, that this sense of intense interactivity or mutuality that he found, because it's not, I don't think many people who have been raised in a theistic tradition find in the Buddha Dharma as much zazz as I do, because of this vitality of being in a living world.
Oh, that's perfect. Yes, I see. I know what you mean, because I also do find that zazz or that zest in the Buddha Dharma, and I always wonder why, there can be a kind of remoteness in a lot of practicing Buddhists, as though they've shut down their volume or something, you know.
Yeah. Oh,
And
and yeah, but the thing is, it's the monks. It's and particularly the first generation monks, and that they were the recipients, and then monasticism grew, and with monasticism, this gulf opened between your thoughts of loving kindness and compassion and all that. There's a gulf widening between that as you sit there in your robes.
yeah.
and the rough and tumble of the real world, and the family life and the householder life, and that there was to help themselves stay, quote, pure, unquote, a rejection of the body in the scriptures, in the ancient scriptures, took place that absolutely set my teeth on edge.
Yes, yes, I really agree with you completely. It's I've written somewhat in criticism of Buddhism in regard to love, because of all of the demands of love, and there can be a very remote perspective on it that kind of confuses it with compassion. But I don't want to get ahead of myself too far here, because I wanted to use another passage here to talk with you, and you're moving into this, about why you wanted to do this project with Rilke. And of course, here I'm talking about the letters, because that's how I came to understand your work with Rilke, was listening to your interview with Krista Tippett. I didn't know you had done this, and so then I read the letters and I saw all of this liveliness and this kind of depth of understanding of life that I hadn't seen in the letters when I was young. When I was young, I just sort of took them as a good reason to have a sexual experience. That's because
right.
I was raised Catholic also, but you know I wonder. Let me read this passage, and then if you could just talk about why you got interested in Rilke right now. And I
Uh-huh.
don't mean I mean, obviously you've been engaged with it all of your life, but interested in doing this translation right now. So here's the passage that I picked out. The art of creating is nothing without the vast ongoing participation and collaboration of the real world, nothing without the thousandfold harmonizing of things and beings. And the creator's pleasure is thereby inexpressibly rich, because it contains memories of the begetting and bearing of millions. In a single creative thought dwell 1,000 forgotten nights of love, which infuse it with immensity. And those who come together in the night, locked in thrusting desire, are gathering nectar, generating power and sweetness for some future poetic utterance. It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful. And, there's this tendency, perhaps, among Western Buddhists, perhaps just my little niche of Buddhist friends here in Vermont, to kind of understand mindfulness and Buddhist teachings as a sort of disengagement from the wild desires of life, almost like leaving the playground or something. And I agree with you that, at least from a Zen perspective, that's not it at all. And it can be I feel, a really harmful mistake if people disengage with their family life or disengage with their relationships. So, uh, could you just talk about why you wanted to bring the letters out at this moment, and if it involves anything in your life as an activist or your life as a Buddhist? I'd love to hear about that.
Well, I need to say right away that it was not in my idea to translate this, nor even my co-translator Anita Barrows. It was a request, an offer from the publisher Shambhala Publications, and that they would we like to do it. They had room to publish it coming right up. If it just a small book is by necessity, and so we had loved everything we had done by and with Rilke, and wondered what it would be like to translate prose, because everything had been his poetry. But I can't. So it wasn't our decision. And it took a little getting used to, because the letters themselves were often written in a hurry. And half of them he's apologizing, as we tend to do when we're writing a dutiful letter. Oh, sorry, this is a little delayed. I'd hope to get to it. I've been very busy, kind of.
Right.
So you don't put something like that, which is essentially tedious, in a poem.
Yeah.
So that the and we also were the first translators of Rilke, and even this was the first public that actually edited the letters. That there were just in a couple of letters. He, as I said, they were written often in a hurry, and he would get sidetracked into some pet peeve, or you know, hurried, get something off his chest, and so we were thrilled that this is the first time that they've been these boring parts, off-topic parts got included. So the question about you're asking, why are why is a woman in her uh, late 80s and another woman in her early 70s who have been translating Rilke suddenly do these letters?
Mm-hmm.
And that uh, we found some things about sexuality that were not in the poems, and they particularly, there's some things about that were so contemporary.
Mm-hmm.
It is so shockingly uh, that uh, that helping us deal with how easy it is to have our genders be something that we can take something of a stand on the sidelines and see each other in
Mm-hmm.
even in within this sexual relationship, even in the act of love, as more than a unable to be defined by gender alone.
Mm-hmm.
That gender and how we understand and embody it can be a burden or a constriction for either gender, and that we can somehow make a little space for each other in our right in the passion itself, to see each other as someone who is fated to be in that gender, or as agreed to be in that gender, and that and something more than the gender itself, that it can arouse feelings of tender feelings that would. There's one where he talks about we can. Wait a minute, I might find it here. I think this was in the fourth letter, where, wait, just a sec. Fourth letter. Oh, here it is. Yeah, yeah. Get a load of this. I mean, really, I find myself wanting to talk to that recent male addition to the Supreme Court. Do not seek each other as objects, but rather as siblings and neighbors, to become human together, simply, seriously, and patiently helping each other bear the burden that sexuality has placed on them.
Beautiful. So beautiful.
Yeah,
It's
so, yeah, like we're, and that thing of his relationship to Lou was one of which she said we were like brother and sister from before that historical moment when incest became a sin. So this is another brotherly, sisterly being, and that there's so much more than their sexual, sexualized gender. And,
yes,
and
yes.
it's something, and I remember feeling this with, and enjoying this with my husband over the years too, that we could be like almost pre-pubertal children playing, you know?
Yes, yes. And I think there
Freedom.
is something of that sibling, just as you were quoting that right now, and I had uh, also thought about selecting that passage
Ah,
for today. I was thinking also, just at this moment, that it could be that Lou Andreas Salome influenced Jung, Carl Jung, who said that he felt that the sibling relationship was more the driver for incestuous feelings than the Oedipal relationship with the parent. Because Jung said it's between the siblings that sexual energies arise, and then they can't be used directly, but the feelings are there very strongly. So that when you fall in love with somebody, often it's the sibling feeling that's under the surface. Now, I remember when I read that in Jung, I thought, well, that's pretty brilliant, because I'd only ever read earlier about the Oedipal incestuous feelings. But now I'm wondering if he got that from Lou, because so many things in the Jungian world came from a woman who was thinking of them. And then Jung incorporated that woman, and either he didn't give her credit or he didn't think it was her idea. He thought it was his own. So,
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, because that idea is definitely in Jung's work, and there it is in Rilke, and who knows? So yeah, that also, in another translation of the letters, he talks about the way they put it in that translation of loving the space between us, rather
Mhm.
like, you have this space between you and your beloved, and you can never close that space. You can never identify fully with who the other person is, but you can love the space. And then you allow for that playfulness and that ability to see the other person as a subjectivity who's different from you, but without nailing it down too much.
Well, Polly, you talk about uh, my elderhood and what I've been experiencing, particularly in these uh, almost 3 years that I've been in my 90s. There is an intensity of my experience of love that is physically felt, not in the genitalia, but in my heart, in my
Mhm.
chest, that and it's hot and it's active, very great energy. Is like a um, Niagara Falls or something,
Wow.
vroom, and that it is uh, comes up uh, with such feelings for humans and non-humans, humans and the planet, humans who are being particularly brave in a situation. I say that because I've recently been in interaction with young people in Myanmar who are basic to the
Mhm.
resistance to the junta. And I just, vroom, there is this feeling as this we're coming closer to uh, the big question as to whether humanity can survive what we have let loose, not just climate change, but the turning on each other that happens.
Yes, 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 yes. That's the issue from my point of view. It's what I'm trying to work on all the time, which is the capacity for human beings to relate to each other through their differences and to value that instead of, having this hostility about needing to replicate themselves again and again through somebody else. So, it's the ability of humans to work together is the key thing in relation to whether we're going to be able to preserve the species. And if our species were gone, maybe some of the other species would be very happy for that.
Yeah,
But we would have lost something really important, which is the kind of consciousness we bring, which has a real flaw in it, but at the same time has
yeah,
some capacities for love. But I I agree with you that the it's like the key thing that humans are facing right now is the hostility that they have with each other, and of course, you know anyone who's written about love and has had a family life and had a relationship understands hostility because it's difficult. And I think that Rilke's issues around sexuality also, in regard to gender identity, uh, are really prescient. But I wonder if it was coming through Lou, that he was getting these ideas and also this insight of being with a woman that perhaps he had not previously known that women could be the way she was.
yeah, because she was the polar opposite of his mother.
Oh, the polar opposite.
And yeah, yeah, it's a wonder that he survived his parents. You know, he was born right after she'd lost a baby girl. And so she, for his first 6 years, she dressed him as a girl.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so it's amazing that he was as masculine and full tilt, um,
Yeah.
him, his own man, that to the extent he obviously was.
Yes, yes. It does make me wonder what else might have been in his mother's heart. I mean, there may have been something there, even though she distorted his identity in favor of an earlier loss or to restore a loss or something. She might have also had some capacities that I don't know. I've begun to rethink a lot about being a mother in these recent years, and giving a lot of, let's say, um, generous space to a woman's experience, because it's such a demanding role,
That's
and
true.
so little has really been written about it, considering how much it's contributed to all of us. Like we wouldn't be here without it. And
Yeah.
uh, and a mother who dresses her child uh, to represent an earlier loss, might also have something else, like some kind of care that would allow, a child to grow up and be resilient in the face of that. I'm just hypothesizing. I mean, I don't know a thing about this, but
Mm-hmm.
but I wanted to read the passage where he talks about the girl and the woman, and it's interesting because he does bring up the clothes that he talks about being clothed, a woman being clothed in masculine clothes, and so uh, maybe this is a bit of a segue into that. Uh, this is the passage: the girl and the woman, in their own fresh unfolding, will only temporarily imitate masculine behavior, be it seen as good or bad or good here, and assume masculine occupations. Once the inappropriateness of such a stage has revealed itself, it will be clear that women have only gone through a change of clothing in order to cleanse their own being of the influence of the other gender. Women who know a more immediate, fruitful, and trustful relationship to life must, after all, have become more humane than men who have not gone through the hardship of giving birth, and who, rash and arrogant, undervalue what they mean to love. I mean, that's an amazing passage.
It is truly.
Like, who says that? Uh,
No, it's deeply sympathetic.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mm.
And but I wondered, when I read it, I wondered, I haven't seen a perspective like this. I don't think ever in my reading feminism has anyone said, well, women are going to take on this masculine clothing in order to liberate something that's fruitful in themselves. Then they're going to shed it because they recognize that they have something more fundamental.
Yeah.
You know, uh, that's. Have you read anything like that any other place?
No, actually, um, and and but I feel that seeing it, this incredible capacity within the poet's heart, mind, that of uh, his awe of life itself, and his refusal to let it be his responses to be pre-patterned by something as um, superficial, I would almost say, than as gender,
Mhm.
because and that he could, the choices that young people are making today, uh, sometimes even pre-pubertal about their gender. It's amazing what he'd say about the choices
Mm-hmm.
they're making in their childhood and in their teens and maybe later, to what is the gender that truly lets me express the life as I experience it and feel it.
Well, apparently, as you said, he had something thrust on him that was a gender shift, but it wasn't something he was longing for. It was something that his mother was longing for.
And then his father, who had been a military man, sent him off to military school.
Ooh.
Yeah.
That must have been a difficult switch. So he went away. Was it a boarding school or?
Yeah, it was and it was this same school that 15 years later or so, this military cadet was at when he met a chaplain who and said, you know, he was holding a book of Rilke's poetry. And he said, oh, he came to this school too, said the chaplain. You know, he came to this school, his name was Rene, because it was Rainer Rilke, which is very close to the feminine version of it with an extra E, Rene. And, but when she met him, had him change his name to Rainer, and so much about him changed.
Mm-hmm.
How he dressed, how he.
Yeah. Well, isn't it interesting that was women? I mean, now that you're saying this, I mean, I, of course, didn't know any of this, but his mother is dressing him one way, then Lou is dressing him another way. and the women are kind of bringing out something in him that they see, and he's expressing things that seem so sympathetic to women. It's interesting. I mean, I don't know what to make of it except to say that that passage that I read about what girls and women might be doing in the future, I'd never read anything like it written by a woman. So it's just interesting how sort of insightful he was even in his youngest years.
That's right.
So, I want to shift gears a little bit to the issue of love in your own life and then also your early work. So, I wonder if just as we're talking, I think of in my own life that the enduring loves have been partner love and then love for my children or love for my parents. I mean, I have love for my friends, but that love is not as fraught. It's not as entangled as, the love for a partner or the love of parents, love of children.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if you have some reflections on love in your own life as in the way that Rilke talks about it, that love is good for us, especially because it's difficult. It's good. I mean, he sort of says solitude is good because it's difficult, but love is good because it's difficult, because of one person to care for another is perhaps the most difficult thing required of us and the utmost and final test, the work for which all other work is but a preparation. I wondered if you have reflections of love in your own life.
That phrase of his, that emphasis of his in the letters, and that I believe that's the only place I've found it, is in his letters to Franz Capus. And it surprises me, and it defies my easy comprehension, because I have not found that to be the case. To love a person is, to me, brings so much The love period brings in so much delight and release of energy and vitality. And I was a few minutes back speaking of the intensity of the love that I feel for life now. And that it might be I don't know whether it's a function of being in my 90s or it's a function that we could be at the twilight of the gods, or that we're very close to our stamping out life on this planet. It's now becomes actually conceivable when we see what we're doing to the natural world and to the forces, to the waters and to the soil and the seas of our planet that have all become toxic, are becoming toxic at a very rapid rate. And they to feel to me like a love for life is for me highly not really that different from the love for engendered through with a human and that I'm in love with.
So you know that
I'm in love with my love for the life has become maybe more eroticized, more erotic as it becomes more threatened.
So that's an interesting point, and I'm going to need to take a short break here to get some ice from my arm because it's swelling up in the cast. So it's just going to be about 5 minutes. If you want to take a break, and we'll come back and talk about desire, the issue of the desire comes into being often when you can't quite reach the other. And of course, you're saying that some of your love for the world has grown because it feels threatened. It feels like you might not.
Well, that's a question. Whether it is, whether it's would have arisen naturally anyway, or is it because it's threatened? Yeah.
So I want to come back to that, and I'll just take a short break here. I'm just going to leave everything on and go get a.
See you in 5 or 10 minutes. What do you want?
5, yes, 5.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. So I want to return then to talk about the issue of whether loving the world and feelings for the planet and feelings for the natural world, if that's the same kind of love as loving another person, in terms of, the, let's say, challenges of love. And you have felt this enormous openness in your heart towards the natural world, with the feeling that the natural world might be soon dying off and disappearing in the ways that we know it.
I also feel this huge love for those who, for humans, particularly those who are threatened by, who are threatened, and for humans who are defending. So that intensity of caring, and for those who have been wounded by our, we've been victimized by our hateful ways.
And so you find your heart is opening, though, especially now in your life, towards what is wounded and perhaps vulnerable or threatened, even. That has been a kind of shift of your eros. Am I getting this?
That's right. And it can be quite eroticized when, for example, I had a relationship cut off early by the pandemic and his death, but of feeling that caring, of awakening, you know, a full tilt sexual feelings in me. So that's and that was very interesting to me. That I couldn't realize or manifest them because of the conditions of our life, and but that erotic charge was just didn't seem one whit diminished by
I agree.
numbers attached, the numbers of years that I've lived.
Yes, I agree. At the moment, I cannot remember the name of the writer. He's a New Yorker writer uh, whose work I was quoting in the memoir that I wrote that's called The Present Heart. And what he was saying is that one thing that's been a surprise for him, and he was in his 90s and his wife had died, was how much he still cared about having a personal love, that he would have thought that it would disappear. But the idea of going to the movies with somebody or sitting in a car or, that this was driving him in a way that was really surprising, given that I think he was 94 at the time.
Mm.
And when I read it, I thought, yes, I don't think that disappears. There's something about it that is in the nature of being human. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, it
Yeah.
was, and it was so to experience that, um, and the ferocity of it, and the beauty of it, and the sweetness, all of that. I thought, oh by gum, good old Mother Nature she just doesn't give up, you know,
Right.
and
Right.
that it gave me a lot of humor and delight.
Yes, yes. And
It's just,
it
oh
does
wow.
it gives the feeling that sex is not about the survival of the fittest. It's I mean
I've got to quote that.
well, it does make you wonder, like, well, this couldn't really be about the survival of the fittest, because it goes on, this desire. And I like Cynthia Bourgeault's idea that, eros is the fundamental one, that it's not, it is that drive to stay together, be pulled together. That's the fundamental love. And that's the path to go through to get to agape. Like agape is not, you can't just go around eros and get to agape. You have to go through eros, which makes one wonder about celibacy and about, monkhood and all of
Yeah,
these, sort of spiritual aspirations to kind of get a workaround on the
yeah,
thing about love and sex.
yeah.
Um, so you noticed that in your own life, but
Oh
you
boy,
also
yeah.
said, and this is where I have a bit of a different experience, that you haven't found love to be that difficult as Rilke says, that it's the most difficult thing, and that we have to be committing to it in an enduring way over and over again. um,
No,
you find that a little different in your experience.
yeah. I can't imagine. Why would he say it's so hard?
Well, I'm a couples therapist. That's my day job. It's one of my day jobs. And I can tell you that I have never seen or experienced so much hatred and hostility as I do in my consulting room with couples who want to stay together. Like, the two people want to stay together, but
Wow.
their experiences of each other uh, have boiled down to the feeling of war. I'm with my enemy, someone who doesn't see me or hear me or get me, or, and I have to go on with this person, and this person intends harm towards me. And I find that that's a fairly, widespread problem for people in couple relationships, and to some extent also adult children and their parents in this period of time. I know now a number of parents whose children have become estranged, not because the parent wants it, but the adult child, has cut off relationships with the baby boomer parent because the baby boomer parent doesn't meet the child's standards for something.
Oh, I've noticed that with daughters of mothers.
Yes.
Especially there?
I've seen both sons and daughters doing it. Right now, I see a mother in therapy whose son has cut off her ability to meet her grandson. And she really didn't, it wasn't as though she didn't do an offensive thing. She made some mistakes, like people do. But, he has calculated his algebra in such a way that she's the problem that he has to eliminate. And it's a tremendous heartbreak for her. But I mean, everybody I've dealt with, and I've dealt with some fathers who have also been cut off, the feeling is this terrible, terrible loss, almost having a limb cut off.
Yeah.
And no way to rectify it because the child is, in his 30s, 40s, 50s, so yeah, I've seen it, in the parent-child bond as well as the partner bond, where the projections or the, expectations of the other person make it impossible for that individual to feel trusting unless they go through a process of, kind of disentangling the entanglements.
And that takes a lot of willingness.
It takes willingness and it takes skill.
Yeah, I bet so. So people find it easier to just say it's too late, or it was too bad, it's over.
Yeah. And that's a very great loss for humans, for a close other. If it's a close other, it's a great loss because we find ourselves by looking at the other, and in our children especially, many parents want to know their adult children now because they want to know who they are as individuals, and that wasn't true for my parents.
That's right. Yeah.
So that Rilke finding love is difficult for one person to care for another, perhaps the most difficult thing required of us. For me, did fit with what I have seen of people suffering from estrangement, from hostility in a couple relationship, and in my own life, I have adult children, grandchildren, and it's not a smooth and easy path. It's rewarding, but it's it's difficult because we have to respect that space between us. That we don't see each other completely accurately, let's say.
Well, what I found in my, I only married one person, and he's gone. But what I found was that as I actually had the courage to write in my memoir, that it involved an openness to loving other people. I'm using a phrase, one of Fran's phrases.
Yeah.
It's okay to love other people. It's a natural thing. And so to be stuck with monogamous commitment to monogamy was not realistic. And if you based it on honesty and openness, you could maintain as long as this is your marriage was your primary commitment.
And that worked. Was that in your relationship with, I haven't read your memoir, that so I'm interested in it, but was that in your relationship with Fran from the start, or from some point?
No, because we were married back in the early 50s, in
Yeah.
53. So I would, I would wished I could have had the foresight. I have friends at least a generation or more younger than I am, now making their vows to at a wedding ceremony to include that.
Hmm. How
Loving
does that vow go? Do you know? I mean, roughly. I'm curious.
How did it work?
How does the vow, is the vow stated like, I will
No,
love
I
you as
don't
my
know.
primary? You don't know. I was
Yeah.
just curious how you make a vow like that. Like,
Yeah, no, but I vowed to. It's just I love you. I maybe actually it'd be like how uh, Germans today don't like to make a vow because it reminds them of the Nazi vow to do things of obedience that you would regret.
mm-hmm.
So that it is my intention. So then you could say instead, my intention, not my vow, because I cannot be responsible for my future activities, but I can make as responsible stating my present intention is
Right.
to always keep this relationship sacred as the primary focus of my capacity to love and serve or whatever.
Oh, see, that's a very good way of putting it and thinking about it. And so you and Fran developed that later in your life together.
Yeah, that was quite a bit. Yeah, that was after almost almost 20 years of what one could call cheating on each other.
Mm-hmm. And then you became more conscious of what you intended.
With and with a degree, and that's that's fully described in the memoir, and that's why the memoir was rejected.
Rejected.
It was a big publisher who wanted the memoir, and when I put that in, along with my political activities, they wanted a wise Buddhist granny at the kitchen table.
Oh dear. Yeah, that's isn't that, I hope it wasn't, it's not a Buddhist publisher. It was a
No,
bigger publisher. Yeah.
no.
Yeah. Well,
You wrote a great blur. I just looked it up the other day. I thought, I wonder if Polly, because you've been in my mind since the last week, knowing, and so I went and looked, and you wrote a blurb for it.
oh, well then I must have read it then.
I bet you did.
That I did.
Yeah, but you said this is, wait a minute, hold on. Wonderful exclamation point. This is what a memoir should be: a celebration of adventures, travail, and I don't know, engagement.
Wow, that's great. I mean, I must have read it then, Joanna. I think, it's so funny. I've read too many things by now. I don't know, maybe you're in the same boat. I mean, sometimes I've written too many things. Like sometimes people will say something that I've written and quote it to me, and I have no memory of it at all. I think
I'm in that camp.
Right, but that sounds like me. That's a great endorsement. And but I do believe with you that life is to be chewed up to the very last bite. And if people don't think that, there's something wrong with them, you know? I mean, are they not living? That's like a publisher that wouldn't want a memoir that has so much interesting sexual stuff in it, and also the ongoing sense of being alive. Well, there's something wrong with the publisher. You know, it's
But I was very lucky because I had my uh, Tibetan Buddhist friends that in India that I was very part of their community, and consulted them because their yogis had divinatory capacities, and I said, "Oh, she wants me to do. My editor wants me to do with this story of my life something that doesn't feel right," and because she thought didn't really want me to put all that stuff in. She wanted something that was more spiritual in her idea of spirituality.
yeah.
And so then they went into these yogis, the first ones ever, only ones ever brought out from Tibet. And they said, okay, all right, now it's best thing, you get her rejection. And it did. I did.
That's great. That's great. So then you went on to you published it with whom?
I published it with, and it was the only time they ever published such a thing. It was a social change publisher called the New Society.
Oh, okay.
Publishers.
Yeah.
And they had
Yeah.
already published my work around the social change network and the um, manuals for the work that reconnects that I developed.
I see. I
Still
see.
going
Well,
strong. Yeah.
very good. Well, I hope that you know, we'll certainly put the book up on this interview so that people can go out and buy it and learn about how to
Yeah.
think about life until the very last moment. Oh, wonderful. There it is. So we will have it up, and the you know, the issue about sexuality, life, gender, and so on is mostly not to close down on a particular way of doing it. My feeling is that way anyway. You know, it's like keep it alive and do what you can and enjoy it, because as Rilke says, it's like any other sensual experience, like food. It's like your clothing. You know, these are things to engage in and to enjoy and play with, and not just sort of lock down on some kind of
Yeah.
rule.
Yeah.
You know, it's
And the title was the poem that I opened to, and the that day when I was in my late 20s in Munich on that sunny, snowy day, and I walked in, saw the book of hours, and opened it to that poem. I live my life in widening circles that reach out across the world. I may not complete this last one, but I give myself to it. I'm circling around God, that primordial tower. And I still don't, and I've been circling for thousands of years.
yes.
And I still don't know, am I a falcon, a storm, or a great song?
Oh my gosh. Oh,
And uh, when I read that, standing there, my whole take on my life broke apart, and I felt welcomed to live in Earth because I had thought I was supposed to go on a linear trajectory toward the holy city, something that I had obviously made a mess of my life by not, committing myself to a spiritual path in a totally 100% way from when I first met God and Jesus in my teens.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And then when I read that, that was what I opened to. And when I read that, and a great sense of both eruption and benediction happened. Oh, I'm alive, and I'm in
Yeah.
orbit. I'm
And you're in orbit. Yeah, you're alive and in orbit.
held.
And
Yeah,
yeah,
there's. I'm still the same one,
right.
and that's why I want you to read, or I'll send to you, the Rilke's Book of Hours.
Oh my gosh, that would be wonderful because actually I haven't read it. You know, it's like it's one of those books I pretended to read
Yeah,
because I've always acted like maybe I
and
have read it,
and
but I
I will
haven't read
send it to you, and I want you to read my introduction, because that I found something that expressed what I'd found in Buddhism. I found it in his Book of Hours.
Hmm. Do you want to say what it is? Can you capture it? What you found that you had found also in Buddhism?
Um,
Or you can read it even, what you wrote.
um, Here's something here. I quote the poem, and then I say, I felt a sense of release because I was standing in the bookstore with my snow on my feet, as if I had been let out of a cage I had not known I was in. Rilke's images lent some pattern, even meaning, to a life I thought I had failed in its spiritual vocation. Once I had imagined that my journey would be like the Pilgrim's Progress, where each adventure brings the hero closer to the heavenly city. But the Christian God with whom I had been intoxicated in my teenage years did not survive the theological studies I undertook to serve him, and it was a him. When I turned outward angry and heartsick, to political affairs, I found that I was a failure as an atheist too, for I could not cure myself of praying to a God I no longer believed in. Now these same lines, read on a snow-packed Munich street, shed a new light on the patchwork my life had become. Marriage, motherhood, abandoned government career, assortment of jobs, studies in art and language. Perhaps, after all, some unknowable center held me in orbit. Rilke reminded me that if my spiritual appetite was greater than the tedious, cramped theorizing of the theologians, so was God. I could almost feel again the sense of belonging and purpose that I thought I had forfeited.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's
That's
so beautiful.
Rilke. That was my first encounter.
That is so I mean, I can feel it all and it's just perfect. It's like perfect as though your life had set you up, you know, just really at the right moment there to come back, you know,
Yeah,
to come back to what that sense of purpose had been. And it happened in this bookstore. Isn't that wonderful too? That, you know, I I love this movie, The Wings of Desire, that Wim Wenders did.
oh,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah,
I
and
have to see that again. Where do I find it?
oh, I'm sure it's online. I mean, there's been a Hollywood version of it, but the first version is much better. And of course, there are these angels who, you know, envy the humans because the humans live in this world of desire where they can do things like taste the peach and drink the wine. But the angels can only live in this world of essentially kind of fantasy. They see the mental pictures, they see what's going on, they have a larger vision. But it's a world where they rarely have access to something that's deep. And what one of the angels says is they go to the library because there people are having spiritual experiences that they can understand. They listen to people's thoughts in the library as they're reading. And it reminded me of that. It's like you were reading something that brought you to God. And in this moment, it was Rilke, which is just making me, want to fall in love with Rilke now.
Oh, well, I'm going to put this, I have to get your address and then I'll send you this.
That's wonderful. And I will send you my address after we're finished. I'll send it on the email. But I want to ask you one more thing. I mean, I feel like I'm imposing on you, but it's wonderful. So that, when I first met you in person, I was teaching at Bryn Mawr College, and you came to do a workshop on nuclear winter. And I participated in that workshop. Now, I'm not sure I have a completely accurate memory, but in part, my memory, the thing that stood out for me was that you had us do a kind of relaxation meditation, and then you asked us why we had chosen our parents. Is that possible that you did that?
Not in that form, but there is a process where we, using the idea of the bodhisattva.
Yes.
And the bodhisattva in the Buddhist frame then chooses to come back.
Right.
And then chooses the conditions of her or his life. And so that I was probably sending you in. Perhaps just imagine you might have chosen to be alive now in order for a purpose.
Yes.
And as you chose to come back, you could that even the notion that you chose to go back could transform your relationship with your parents. Because what if you had been asked where and through whom will you come back? And then I could have said, well, Good Shepherd Hospital in Los Angeles in 1929. I will, and I chose those unlikely parents. I was, and that was part of my forgiveness of my father for his tyranny. The idea that he was an agent to my being here now, and he also showed me how I must stand up for life.
Yes, yes. And so he evoked in you some of your strengths, even though he did it perhaps with some cruelty or meanness or unconsciousness, just plain unconsciousness.
Yeah.
And yes, and for me in that very short, it was a day. It wasn't even a weekend, as I recall, at least. I saw my parents in a different light.
Really?
And, yes, I did. And I remember at least that you had us write down the answer, because I had the answer for a while, but I was actually born to parents who had not even entered high school. They had each had only an 8th grade education. They worked in a factory, and my father was quite mentally ill in his way. He was also very intelligent, but in that little inquiry, I deeply could see that I was able to transcend their authority. By the time I was about 12, I no longer believed that they knew the truth or the reality of the world, which set me into an independence that was very fierce, but still very polite, because they were Catholic and they ran a strict household there. So I wasn't going to get away with any kind of, rebelliousness at all. But I had this sense that I could think for myself from a very early age. And that was a tremendous gift that I probably could not have gotten any other way. I mean, they preserved enough continuity for me to retain my own thoughts because there was stability, but also they lacked authority and I became independent. And it all fitted together. And I saw them very much more kindly and tenderly, and not at all in terms of the way I had previously seen them, was that it was a vast mistake and it couldn't be through any kind of choice.
Oh, isn't that wonderful? Thank you for telling me that.
Yeah, it really, really made a difference. And I had been in psychoanalysis by then, quite a lot actually, but nobody had ever asked me to look at my parents from that point of view, you know. And of course, I knew the idea from Buddhism, but at that point, I wasn't subscribing to that idea.
Yeah, and most people don't, but uh, I I think that I like to play around with uh, and use the imagination to realize what could be very truly so.
Exactly, exactly. And I see, through that exercise, I have now a very different sense of people coming into their lives with those particular parents and siblings and so on. Now I believe it has deep meaning. It's very personal, and it always has the liberating side to it. It's never simply the depriving side, even in the case of terrible trauma, that the other side is present. And that's what I think allows people deeply to be resilient. I mean, you can have shallow resilience, but deeper resilience is that you see the inherent liberation in your situation, even if it was really, really difficult. So I I have to say that it was your day at Bryn Mawr that brought all of that to my mind and to my being, and that was the first time I really engaged in your work. Then I began to read your work, and
Yeah. Well, I can believe that because I, as a child, and particularly in my early teens, I had one great fear, and my fear when I was thinking is that I would one day forgive my father.
oh,
And I wanted to, I could not, I had to keep living in order to see him. And at some point, accablé, beaten down by the choices and behaviors he had allowed in himself. And, and now this work has caused me to be grateful for him. I picked a good one.
yeah, yeah.
If I wanted to be able to uh, stand up for what I think is right against all odds, if I wanted to create a courageous woman, I'd give her a dad like that.
Wow, I can see exactly what you mean. I mean, I can tell that your fierceness is also deeply genuine and interactive with humor and kindness. And so I imagine also perhaps there were other influences there, but the fierceness
Oh,
is
yeah.
very clear. The fierceness is clear. So what did your father do in his life? What was he?
Never understood it, but he would go in the morning to take a subway train to Wall Street.
So
So
he did something on Wall Street.
yeah, yeah. So he advised people on trading secure bonds and securities.
And your mother then stayed at home with the
Yeah, she was
children.
a stay at home.
And who was the strong Christian influence?
My grandfather my dad's father, and the fact that I found the church to be a place that I could we could go as a family, because it was my paternal grandfather. There was a long list of parsons and pastors, and it
Wow.
you know, so I had, and the church was one place where people were uh, nice to each other.
Yes, yes. I had the same experience in the Catholic Church. So, what denomination was it?
It was sort of liberal Protestant,
Mhm.
uh, um, Presbyterian slash congregational.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and that was in California, in Los
No, that
Angeles.
was because what uh, I was all on the
No,
East Coast, New York City
yeah,
and
right.
Western New York, and I was very close to my paternal grandparents, and went every summer to my grandfather, who was a minister, but he had a farm, an old family farm, so that I could, uh, um, yeah. And then I had a breakthrough experience uh, as I was turning 16 uh, to the reality of the sacred.
Yes. And was that, where was the farm then?
It was not far from the Erie Canal between
Oh,
Rochester and Buffalo.
oh yeah. Okay. Not so far from the Rochester Zen Center where I started
Yeah.
out.
Oh,
But,
yeah.
yeah,
Oh, really?
but,
Yeah. Lovely
that's,
place.
yeah, that was. I loved Philip Kaplow actually. But so your breakthrough, was it at the farm then?
No, it was, I had gone to a um, religious week-long conference that the Presbyterians held for young people. And it was beautifully organized. It was out in New Jersey at a summer uh, at a private school people were using for that Blair Academy. We just went there, and there was a chaplain, an Air Force chaplain. It was in 1945. The war had just stopped in Europe, still going on in the Pacific, but and he was coming back, this chaplain, and he uh, had a class every morning for these teenagers uh, and that I uh, listened to, and he presented the uh, drama of the choice to face our um, cruelty and inhumanity, to actually face it, because it wasn't just in the war, it was in all the ways we hurt each other and cheated each other, and uh, and then and married that idea, wedded that idea to uh, Good Friday and Easter,
Hmm.
and it was incredibly powerful. And I, I was, my eyes couldn't leave the face of this. He looked as he was walking back and forth. He was just fresh from, and he felt it wasn't just the horrors of
Mhm.
the European theater of war, but it was the fact that of all the things that caused war to begin with,
Right.
and what was going on in our own military um, profiteering, war
Mm.
profiteering, and what was going on in our migrant labor camps, and so, and I just had a um, of the uh, what we agree to, our sleaziness as humans,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and
Wow.
held it up, and then I didn't know what in the world to do with this, and here I was at the last day of this week, and I felt, but what do I do? I know I see it, I see it, I see it. And so I asked for a little meeting with this chaplain, and he looked like a businessman. He was just, and he agreed to meet me in the chapel at the before anything started the final day. And I told him, I said, I see it, what we're doing, how crummy we are and everything, but what do I do? And so then what he did was just amazing. He pointed up to where the cross was, and he said, see that? It's empty. He's not hanging on that anymore. He has risen, and he's risen into the immensity of your own heart.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Imagine having the good luck and grace to hear that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's a wonderful place for us to conclude. I mean, that's a beautiful story. And it also brings together that transformation of the cruelty and the sleaziness into, the goodness of your own heart. It comes, I mean, again and again, I'm always reminded of the first noble truth that's the doorway that we're all going through, and you don't have to shop for it. You will go through it. And then it can transform to the goodness of your heart. And obviously in your life, you show it on so many levels. And I'm so grateful that you've had your life overlapping my life and that we've known each other. And I'm also really grateful that you keep going. So, just keep going.
Yeah, I do.
Yes. And so thank you so much. And thank you for translating Rilke and for having it as a background. It's like a background sound to the, sound of one hand clapping or whatever. I mean, you've got the Buddhism thing, but you have this other thing going in the background that has been so important. And so thank you, dear.
And I'll send this now. I may have a copy that's with the German, but if I could just send you the one that doesn't have the German.
Oh, don't bother with the German. I can read it a little, but it won't grab me.
Right.
So just the English is good. That's
Now,
thank you so much.
Yeah, and don't forget to cast an eye on the preface by me.
Oh, of course, absolutely. That's where I will begin. And you've read a wonderful
here it is.
passage. Thank you. Thank you. The Book of Hours.
Blessings.
So thank you, my dear. Yes.
I hope you feel well.
Oh, thank you. I'm sure I will. And I feel sure we'll see each other again. So
I do hope so. Wouldn't that be good? All
that
right.
would be.
Blessings on you, dear.
Yes. Thank you.